Hello and welcome to WION World is One. I'm Kanishka Sarkar. US-Iran tensions have flared up once again and put the global markets on edge. Oil prices have jumped, the dollar is strengthening, and investors are watching the Strait of Hormuz closely. However, despite rising tensions, gold did slip initially. To understand what does this mean for global economy and India, we have Mark Brolin, who's a geoeconomic and geopolitical strategist, as well as an author. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining me on WION today. Let's start by talking about crude oil prices. They immediately jumped over 3% right after the US strikes. Now, how much higher do you think the oil prices could go if this escalation in the Strait of Hormuz continues? Or do you think this is just a temporary knee-jerk reaction?
I think it might be a short-term reaction, but we really don't know. So it's sort of interesting analytically. There is no resolution in the Hormuz Strait, so that is, of course, a problem. But it can be a negotiation gambit. And I think Trump is negotiating on two fronts now. He's negotiating, obviously, against Iran. But it might not be a coincidence that he's also now at the NATO summit. And he might want to prove a point there that US is willing to go alone unless the other NATO countries sign up to his agenda. So I think it could be a one-off, but then again, nobody knows for sure, and that's why markets are reacting like they are. They are saying there is perhaps a little bit more need to panic than it was last week.
All right. Like you said, he might be indicating that the US is ready to go alone. So Washington didn't just launch airstrikes, it also completely revoked Iran's oil export waiver, right? How effectively do you think can US block Iranian crude from the global market right now? And who do you think feels the supply squeeze first?
Yes, that's a great issue, great question, because we have seen over recent months, I think that's one of the main takeaways from the Iran-US war, that both sides have strengths, but they also have weaknesses. I mean, US can affect things, but they can't dominate things, just as Iran can affect things, but not dominate things. So we have this standoff, and I think that standoff is going to carry on. But I do think Trump is in a desperate position in the sense, just as Iran is actually, but he does want to have some sort of resolution to this before the election. So I think his play, as he always does, he adds maximum pressure at some point for negotiation purposes. But he has done this now so many times, so the effect has probably worn off a bit. But I do still think this is very much part of a negotiation.
Understood. And Mark, speaking of other commodities like the yellow metal, normally a major escalation in West Asia that drives investors straight to safe haven gold. Yet we did see the spot gold dipping slightly before it edged higher, while the US dollar, of course, is strengthening. Why do you think gold didn't surge alongside gold this time? And what explains this move?
Well, yeah, I mean, for obvious reasons, it goes up when there is geopolitical risk. But this means that geopolitical risk is probably smaller than what is happening in the US. And people are expecting Fed raising the rate, possibly, and that weakens the dollar. So we have the dollar pressure at the same time as geopolitical pressure. And it does seem like the geopolitical risk is priced less than what's happening in the US. So
right.
in a sense, that's a good sign for what's happening in the Hormuz Strait.
Understood. And, so that's about the yellow metal. But with 3 commercial tankers recently targeted, the Strait of Hormuz, like you said, is back in the danger zone again. Now, if there is a prolonged naval blockade or a full halting of traffic through this choke point, what is the worst-case scenario for the global energy supply chains?
I mean, it's bad news. Absolutely. It's not as bad. Some people are saying this is a worse crisis than it was in the 70s, but it's not true, because the world is less dependent on oil, not in an absolute sense, but in a relative sense, because there are so many other energy sources. But of course, it is absolutely bad news, and it will affect not as much as it did back then, but it affects things, and it's just bad. Yeah, it's bad for the world economy. But then again, the more positive side of that story is that people are turning away, buyers are turning away as much as they possibly can from Iran. And are developing new supply chains. So I think this might be actually the last time, or these coming years might be the last years that Iran is able to put the world on a stronghold as they have over recent months. But still, it's still a problem. It will remain a problem for some years to come, but possibly not after that.
Okay. Understood. And, you were earlier highlighting how there are different factors that are weighing in the U.S. apart from the Iran conflict. It's the dollar depreciation, the Fed as well. Now, higher oil prices, they've usually meant inflation fears. Now, if energy costs, they stay elevated because of this conflict, now does it take interest rate cuts completely off the table for global central banks like for the U.S. Fed?
Yeah, it does if the inflation seems to be sticky. Absolutely. I mean, Trump always wants an interest rate cut, but his power is fading. So if the inflation is sticky, I think it does take it off the table. So that's one of the biggest questions the markets will look at over the coming months.
Right. Rate hikes or cuts are going to be the biggest key point as far as the FOMC minutes are concerned. But lastly, I would also like to understand a little bit about the impact in India. Now, if this conflict drags on, how soon do you think the average consumer is going to see impact on fuel prices, logistics and household budgets, not just elsewhere in the world, but also in India?
Well, famously, India is one of the strongest economies, of course, of the world. But perhaps the weakest point of them all is energy, as we all know. There is a double whammy, which is a bit unfortunate now. And it is, of course, the situation in the Hormuz, which we have talked about. And it is also that when the US dollar strengthens, the rupee tends to weaken. And that's also a problem when buying stuff from the outside world. So I think, like in the rest of the world, but perhaps even more so, it's not going to be catastrophe for Indian consumers, but it's going to be bad news. So I think that is all. I think that is the takeaway for now.
All right. So thank you so much, Mark, for joining me today and helping me with all of those insights. Of course, we'll keep tracking the story and get back to you for more inputs. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Well, the conflict remains fluid, and markets will be watching every move in the West Asia conflict. We'll continue tracking the impact on oil, inflation, and the global economy. Thank you for watching.